going back to just after World War II, the war is over and Hitler is in Argentina. The production of cars kicked into a whole new gear, which I'm told is a car thing. GM opened up another plant in Van Nuys in 1947, which I'll get to a little bit later because it's in the valley.
Yeah.
That's going to be its whole own episode. They were making at this one in Van Nuys Corvairs, Novas, Camaros, Chevy full sizes, and Firebirds.
And the 1964 Chevy Nova is my dream car.
I don't even know what that looks like. Is that wheels?
It's got wheels, buddy.
Whoa.
It's got wheels driven by another wheel.
It's got four wheels, and behind the wheel is a wheel. So Ford opened up another plant in Commerce in 1948 at 5801 Southeastern Avenue that made Lincolns and Mercuries. Nash Motors, which I don't even know what that is, opened up in El Segundo in 1948. Kaiser Fraser, again, which I think it's part of the new
He worked with Hitler, right?
Kaiser Fraser.
Yeah, Kaiser Fraser.
It was Niles Goebbels. So, his most trusted lieutenant, Eddie. Herr Eddie.
They call him the dog.
Not to be confused with Bulldog. So Kaiser Fraser opened near the Long Beach airport in 1949, making Deluxe, Special, and Travelers, whatever those are.
Yeah.
Then a little later in 1958, Ford opened yet another plant at 8820 Washington Boulevard in Pico Rivera, making Mercury and Edsel. So there were a lot of even Ford. There were like 3 or 4 Ford plants.
Wow.
At the peak of car manufacturing in LA, there were some 15,000 people across the city building cars, churning out 500,000 automobiles a year in Los Angeles. Supposedly during the 60s, we overtook Detroit in the number of cars built. Really? So, but as George Harrison keeps trying to tell us, all things must pass.
Talk about kidney stone.
All pain must linger
all stones
for a few
must
days.
Pass.
At a certain point in the 60s, car companies realized something crucial. Americans are expensive. It would save them so much money if they could move these car factories to other countries where nasty American concepts like unions and living wages weren't so important to people.
In other countries, they're just happy to work.
They thank us that we can put a little bit of food on their table.
And we mean a little bit. And we don't mean table. We mean ground. You can't afford the table. Earth's table.
So that's exactly what they started doing. The car factories of LA started being moved overseas or into non-union parts of the US like the South because they could make their cars for much cheaper but charge more.
Yeah.
On top of that, imported cars from non-American companies started making ground in the market here, which lowered the demand for U.S. car companies that were not as well regulated and not as fuel efficient during the oil crisis of the 70s compared to cars from Asia or Europe.
Okay.
So because of this, by 1971, 41% of all the cars in LA were imports, and that number just kept growing.
Yeah.
And that was the same year the first of the major car factories in LA closed, which was the Chrysler plant in Commerce, laying off 1,300 people lost their jobs.
What year was that? Sorry.
1971.
Okay.
But some other ones had already closed by this point, but this was the first one seemingly to be related to the shift in car buying that was happening.
Yeah.
That's also a car term, I'm told. Shift. I don't know. The
same one you used before. Go ahead.
No, that was a gear. I said gear. Yeah. Those are not related, I think. The downtown Ford plant had closed in 1930. Kaiser Fraser closed in 1951, but it's coming back on Paramount Plus. Willys Overland closed in 1954. Nash closed in 1955. Ford Long Beach closed in 1959. Studebaker closed in 1956. Ford and Commerce closed in 1957, but the Chrysler one was a huge factory to close. The next big one came in February 1980 when the Ford in Pico Rivera closed, laying off 1,670 people. Then in April 1982, the GM plant in Southgate closed, laying off a whopping 2,550 people. And then suddenly, the only car manufacturer left in LA was the GM factory in Van Nuys.
Wow.
Which is kind of a minor case study of what was going on and what had happened at the bigger plant. So I'm going to go into that now. Like I said, this place had opened in 1947 at 8,000 Van Nuys Boulevard in what you would now call Panorama City.
Panorama City.
It was 100 acres big. Wow. And like a lot of these plants were, it was a big factor in developing the surrounding neighborhood. This one in particular was influential in bringing people to that entire part of the valley. So these were union jobs that paid well and land around there was cheap at the time. Mm-hmm. So families started popping up and building houses and it became kind of like a little company town like Van Nuys, Panorama City. Wow. The families knew each other and were bonded by employment at GM, which they were proud of working there. Like we are a GM family. If you ever buy a Ford car, we will
burn your house to the ground.
But it's okay because it's cheap. That's like a day's wage. You could build a new house.
Just work it off.
We're gonna do overtime for like 30 minutes. You'll buy a new house. Workers would go to drink together at places in the area like the Trophy Room or Shea Ho or Opie's, which cool. I'm sure any one of those you would pay to go to these days.
Oh, absolutely. And you would have to drag me out.
Opie would have to drag you by the scruff. Yeah.
He said something about Yamaha. He wants a dirt bike.
Are you speaking Japanese in a GM town? Are you speaking Japanese in Panorama City? By 1977, these were the people physically building all the Camaros and Firebirds in the country. We're coming out of Van Nuys.
Thunderbirds are beautiful.
Firebirds, not Thunderbirds.
Oh, what did you say?
Camaros and Firebirds.
I don't know
Thunderbirds.
I don't know what a Firebird is.
Not a T-bird, an F-bird.
Yeah. F-bird. I'm going to flip you the F-bird.
I'm going to lay an F-bird right now. But they were hit just as hard by the influx of imported cars, and the recession of the 80s just made that worse. Yeah. So the cost of living went way up, and the layoffs started. The United Auto Workers Union decided to picket them for higher wages and also to protest the discrimination some of the Latin American and black workers were facing in the factory. Mm-hmm. Cesar Chavez came to the first rally at the GM factory. Then GM started threatening to move the factory to Canada, which united all the workers there, including the white ones, the Jay Leno's, and got both Jesse Jackson and Maxine Waters involved, where they pressed upon GM the need for them to take responsibility for the community that popped up because of this factory and to not abandon them just to try to line their own pockets. Yeah. Like, this town will fail if you leave. This actually did convince them and won them a few more years, but in 1989, GM decided the factory was going to close for good. GM they couldn't afford to do business in Van Nuys anymore, they claimed. The Van Nuys plant was also in desperate need of modernization, which would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars at a time when in 1991, GM posted a loss of $4.5 billion.
Yikes.
They lost that much money. The story came to an end on August 27th, 1992, when the Van Nuys factory closed and Camaro and Firebird production was moved to Quebec,
Canada.
Happy Halloween! Halloween!
Tune into Candy Dandy to hear what that's about.
Coming soon to Candy Dandy, a French accent. This was the end of the last of the auto plants of Southern California, was the GM Van Nuys plant. They had made just that plant 6.3 million cars during their run. And by the time of closing, they were still doing 406 cars a day, which was about one per minute that they were open. 2,600 people lost their jobs from this plant closing. But an interesting thing happened on the last day. The last car to be made was a Chevy Camaro Z28, and a collector had already prearranged to buy that specific car and had also been offered to come watch it being built. So when he got there, the workers were not particularly happy, but as it was going down the assembly line being built, each worker started signing the part of the car that they were responsible for. Wow. And then the word got out of this, and all the workers who were not even involved with making that car came back the next day and signed the insides of this car. Wow. So there's over 2,000 signatures of all the people who worked at the GM plant on the insides of this car as like a memorial for all the people who actually liked their jobs and were proud of what they did at this place. So sad. It was also nice that the guy who bought it got the license plate for it. Was for UAW 645, meaning for United Auto Workers Local 645 in honor of all these people.
That's nice.
The factory was demolished in 1998 and replaced with The Plant, which is a big shopping center that I think has a Tutti Frutti.
I mean, I know this is all sad, but guys, what we gained?
There's a Tutti Frutti, right? I mean,
what we gained in the ashes?
2,600 workers, but they have a lot of toppings to choose from. They have like 2,600 toppings to choose from at Tutti Frutti.
That's a topping for each person laid off.
In honor.
Yeah, in honor of them.
So there are no longer any car manufacturers operating in Los Angeles. The closest is TABC Inc., Tab Inc. at 6375 Paramount in Long Beach, which opened in 1972. They were the first Toyota parts plant in the U.S., so they just make parts for Toyota. So that's kind of the closest we have.
Okay.
But what this all got me thinking about, other than, man, Jay Leno looks good in denim, is that if any of these factories had closed in some other smaller town where like that was the industry, it would have been the end of that town. Sure. Like it would have turned whatever town that was into like a sad semi-ghost town where you get harvested for your fillings if you run out of gas there. Like it would have destroyed anybody else. But LA has survived so many failing industries. In this episode alone, it survived two different industries, the failing of railways and the failing of cars.
Yeah.
But the amount of business that goes on here is so diversified that nothing can stop us.
No.
Cue the ending of Doctor Strangelove. But yeah, that's what, like, it's sad in a way. It's sad in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's sad.
But it's just like how many, like oil, rails, cars, aerospace, kind of like even kind of movies, like so many industries have failed here that sort of established LA, and yet it's still going.
Yeah, this will never be a ghost town no matter how much we want it to be.